Welcome to the Trailblazers Guide to College Admissions. I'm your host, Kathleen McCaffrey, founder and CEO of The Advisory, where we help ambitious students and families navigate the path to top-tier colleges with clarity, confidence, and heart. Today's episode is a must-listen for families with neurodivergent students, those who think, learn, and lead in unique ways. We're joined by Dr. Samantha Clemens, an expert in learning profiles and executive functioning, who has spent her career helping students with ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurodivergent identities thrive academically and emotionally. We'll unpack what executive functioning really means, how to spot challenges early, and most importantly, how students can leverage their strengths to get into dream colleges. And if you're wondering how to translate all of this into a real plan, we can help. You can book an admissions strategy session with our team to create a bespoke roadmap based on your student's unique learning profile. You don't have to do this alone. Let's dive in.
Welcome, Samantha. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
So excited to be here, Kathleen. Thank you for having me.
Is there anything you'd like to add to your bio or to introduce yourself in a different way?
Sure. Well, I've been in practice now for about 20 years with a doctorate in clinical psychology, postdoc fellowship in neuropsych testing, and I consider myself an educational architect, really figuring out how do we learn best and how do we optimize our learning profile strengths. In my practice here in Los Angeles, I work primarily with students in middle school, high school, and college, and I see students in person and virtually all over the nation, and really feel so lucky that I get to help students figure out how do they learn and how can we navigate these complex worlds.
I love the word learning architect that you used. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you?
Absolutely. Well, as we know, everyone learns differently, and we all approach the world in our own specific way. And so the idea that we send our kids to school and just expect everyone to be able to access information, process information in the same way, that's just silly. We all know just from living that we see the world in complex different ways. And the idea of an educational architect is really how do we build all of the pieces together? We want to build a foundation. We want to have the building, and we want to figure out what does that building look like and how can we utilize all of that information to navigate different educational opportunities, career paths, life paths. I don't believe that we want our kids to be doubling down on areas that are not natural areas of strength. We want to make sure that we're hunting for two patterns when we're looking at our kiddos. We want to say, where are they naturally strong, which we as a society don't often do. We often are always looking at what's not going well, what's not working well. Instead, I want to build a stronger foundation in what's already a natural gift so that we can alert the brain to ways to find optimization tools for those strengths. So, for example, if someone is a really strong communicator, we want them to be in spaces where they can do more of that. If they are struggling in reading, say they have a dyslexic profile, we want to give them the tools to be able to approach that type of learning. And we want them to be able to find their own superpowers within that learning profile. If someone is a strong auditory processor, we want them to be doing Audible. We want them to be doing text to voice. We want them to be in lectures. If they're not a strong auditory processor, we want them to know how to preview material ahead of time visually so that when they're in lecture spaces, they have the tools to be able to process and master that material. So equipping students or truly anyone, this can apply to adults as well. It doesn't just end when we're done with our formal education. If adults are also equipped with this, it can help make strategic career decisions, life decisions based on the way that they see and process the world.
I just adore you, and everything you say is brilliant. I was just going to put that out there. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours actually with the executive director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard, which is like it's sort of a mini Central Park. And I'm not that interested in plants and trees, but this man is obsessed. He's like so passionate, so infectious. He spoke for an hour about like tree bark. Okay. And
Beautiful.
it was a room of 100 people. Everyone was like so engulfed in what he was saying because he was so passionate. And he was talking about like, you know, following your obsessions, that he's been like obsessed
Ed,
with trees and nature, and like nature as a public health benefit, and how they weren't closed not even one day during COVID, and like how much joy is cultivated in nature. And I was like, this is not a topic I'm super passionate about, but I'm like going on Saturday to the Arboretum in Boston to see it because he was so passionate. And I just imagine, like, what if he was terrible at calculus in school or all these things? And, you know, his teachers were like trying to pigeonhole him into something and not
Ed,
seeing you're obsessed with tree bark? Okay, that is like a whole career. You could be running a philanthropic foundation. He was like, I raise hundreds of millions of dollars and it's so easy. People love giving me money because they love the Arboretum. And it's like, but they also love your passion for it. And
he's a perfect example. I love that as a ideal vision for how our students can see their own futures, because the opportunities are expansive. And that's actually the advice I give all the time. Let's figure out what lights you up. And if we don't know, let's go on a journey to find out. Let's figure out what lights you up, because truly, if you follow your passions, and those can be multiple passions, it can change over time. There's absolutely a career path and a way to make that a integral part of your life. And furthermore, even if it's not a career path, it is vitally important to have those hobbies and interests that fuel you, because sometimes in life you are going to have to take coursework or do things that doesn't light you up, and you need to have the fuel in order to face all of that, to have the stamina to be able to do that. And so finding both of those at the same time is vitally important, whether it's a direct path to your career, like this Arboretum director, or if it's simply something that allows you to go through life in a way that feels meaningful. Both are important to do. And I think when we're looking at rigorous academic coursework, that piece gets lost a lot of times. We oftentimes act as though we just have to grind it out. We just have to bulldoze through. And it's not that that's not important. We do need to build that stamina. But in order for the brain, the body, and the soul to have enough oomph to do that, we need to figure out what makes you human, what makes you feel excited. And it can be anything from trees and plants to excitement over makeup, over shoes, over basketball, whatever it is that you find excitement for. That fuel, that dopamine rush, that serotonin is going to help you face the stuff that's not fun. And I think that's part of what our schooling does teach our muscle memory and our brains and our bodies, is that no matter how exciting your career path is, there's going to be a percentage that's not fun. And I always tell my students this: Taylor Swift arguably has one of the most incredible careers on the planet. But when she prepares for her tours, she's running on the treadmill for 3 hours singing her songs to build up her lung capacity in order to perform at the highest level. I guarantee those 3 hours are not fun. I guarantee it is grueling and difficult. But she has built up enough stamina to face that, that she can then perform at her best and live her dream career. And that's what we want to remind our kids, that part of what they're doing in school is a metaphor. It's building up that stamina. It's building up the capacity to face that at hopefully small percentage of time that's not super exciting fireworks all the time. But at the same time, we want to be able to find those areas that are really going to drive you through life, so that you know why you're working so hard. Why, as a parent, you're saying it's important to do your schoolwork, important to over prepare and get yourself into that exam and do well. Kids and humans need to understand what's the bigger picture there.
So much alignment. Reminds me of the French Jewish philosopher Simone Weil. She has this amazing essay on cultivating attention, and that like the purpose of learning German or doing calculus isn't like to learn German or do calculus, but I mean, her perspective, which is mine as well, is like that it's sort of prayer, like it's a spiritual exercise. And I think in this day and age when our attention spans are so hijacked by social media, etc., like I meet so many kids who say, I don't like reading. And like, you can't not like reading. You just haven't found a story that captivates you. It could be audio, it could be performed live, it could be a book. But like, I think we're losing a lot of magic in how, like with all of these technological advances, which are great, but in terms of what you talked about, cultivating like perseverance and grit and with some clear end goal is so important for all students.
Absolutely. And to that end, the way that you described where students say, I don't like to read, what I would want to know is let's have an understanding of their learning profile. So through testing, we really get a snapshot of where the visual processing is, the auditory processing, the visual spatial. Really having a deeper understanding of that can help us to then find the right approach to reading in general. And it could be that they are really strong with their visual and visual spatial processing. So if they're reading history, for example, having a YouTube video that they watch prior to doing the reading, or reading a summary so that they understand the bigger picture prior, or if auditory processing, like you mentioned, is a strength. We have now so many tech tools to take PDFs, articles, books, from text to auditory, from text to dictation. And those are options for complex learners and knowing what process may work best for them. Because I will say, for the most part, the foundation of if we're going on a more traditional academic journey, strengthening that ability to consume material is important. And it's important if you're in STEM, it's important if you're in the humanities, it's important globally. And so from a young age, figuring out what is going to be the key to unlocking them and to then strengthening that muscle is super important. One of the other analogies I use to a lot of my students is that the middle school, high school experience is LeBron before he's in the NBA. He is shooting thousands of free throws. He is sprinting. He is running. Nothing is the excitement of the championship game. He is just practicing and doing drill after drill after drill in order to get himself to the NBA. And that is the experience of those early years that I liken to kind of robot years, where there isn't a lot of insightful, meaningful experiences. That tends to happen in college, grad school, and beyond. And these years of that battle, where I have a lot of parents say, we have so many homework battles, it's really hard to convince my kiddo why this is even important. And that piece, we need to have early exposure to mentorship in the world of why are we doing all of this? Well, why was LeBron shooting thousands of free throws and practicing? Because he had a vision. He knew where he was going and what he wanted. And that's the same thing for our students. It's one of the reasons why I love the work that you do with students, where you are paving the way for them to find real meaning in the world. It's not for a resume. It's not just to get into a school. It has the added benefit of your students having so many doors open, so many incredible institutions wanting them. But we know that the work you do goes far beyond having those doors open. It allows these students to see themselves as real contributors out there, whether that's you having them work with PhD students who are doing marine biology and that's their passion. They get to do that research on the ground, or you're finding the right mentorship for high school students to build businesses. All of those things allow that brain to connect to, why am I working so hard in classes that don't necessarily light me up? And we're able to then reinforce to them that a lot of these classes, like you mentioned, why am I doing calculus? You may not use that in the future, but it's a metaphor for your brain and your soul that you can do hard, crazy, complex, weird things. And that feedback loop to your brain that you can face something that feels almost impossible. And through creative approach and grit and determination, you can do it. That's a really important feedback loop to the brain. And all of that integrates together at this crucial time of brain development where you have this narrow window in order to really form these strong neural pathways of I already know that I can endure. I can go the distance. And that way, when you do find that thing, that arboretum moment where you go, oh my gosh, this is my passion, you're not doing it at a superficial level. You're not just dabbling in it. You're able to go deep and you're able to commit to it. And I think that's what we all want for, our youth. And even us as adults, we want to be able to continually reinvent ourselves and be able to apply that stamina building skill set.
There's something that you just said that I want to dig into, but before we do that, I want to backtrack and just go over some kind of key terms that you mentioned in case anyone's unfamiliar with, like learning profile, specifically
Yes.
that phrase, and a little bit more about neurodivergence. And what I love is that you brought this up through the lens of joy, really, and creativity. And often I think for parents or kids, these terms are used as like something's wrong, you're not learning in the
Yes.
right way, or you're not able to take tests like everyone else. And so if you could kind of explain those terms through, your own beautiful lens.
Absolutely. So we know that there's a whole field out there of neuropsychologists that will do comprehensive educational and psychological testing. And the reason why a lot of families are recommended to do that is exactly what you described. A teacher might say, your kid isn't meeting the standards in the following areas. We recommend doing some testing. I recommend to families if they have the ability and the means to do so. And again, it can be cost prohibitive for some families. And if it is possible to do so, having this information early can absolutely help you make key and crucial decisions. And let's go into what the logistics are of the testing. The testing will include a full comprehensive battery on the student's IQ that's broken down into categories. And those categories are going to assess the student's working memory, and that would include their auditory processing. So the way that would apply in the classroom is you're sitting in your chair, the teacher is speaking. How easy is it for the brain to hold and manipulate that auditory information? Super important to know because you could be off the charts in other areas, but if your brain simply does not hold and take in that auditory information, you're going to miss a lot of things in the classroom. And there's ways for us to proactively put tools and measures in place so that doesn't happen. For example, previewing information ahead of time, getting some scaffolding from the teacher of some outlines of what the lecture is ahead of time. So you have a visual in front of you, talking out the information back and forth before you're seeing it and after you're seeing it. Having that understanding of, is that just a natural skill set that I have, can help. Another area of that IQ testing is going to be around your verbal comprehension. How strong are you with communicating back and forth? How specific are you with being able to retrieve vocabulary? All of that is going to be useful in knowing, is this a student that's going to be naturally gifted in presentations, or is this something we need to work on so that they're equipped with the ability to do so? Another area is going to be visual spatial processing. I see a lot of incredible athletes that have off the charts visual spatial processing where they're able to see the soccer field or the lacrosse field and see how things are integrating at the highest levels. And that goes right back to their learning profile. but visual spatial processors are our Lego builders, and in robotics, and a lot of times really strong kinesthetic learners, which is so important to know because our traditional schools don't tend to focus on the kinesthetic learning. And if that's part of your profile, we want to do tons of stuff outside of the classroom in order to maximize that strength. And it goes on and on from these different categories that we're looking at. There's processing speed that is also vitally important. How easily are you able to look at information, write the information, and that would be impacting with your math class where you're having to write down a series of steps, important to know. And if there is a delta between these, there is a possibility that the student would then qualify for accommodations on standardized tests in the classroom. That's where we often see extended time qualifications. And that's super important to know because oftentimes students simply need more time to be able to take in information, process, and execute. And you can have a super bright kid where one or more of these areas is impacted. And if we have the right interventions, the right support and plan, it can make all the difference in the world of their lived experience. Instead of them falsely creating a narrative in their brain of, I'm just not smart enough, or I'm lazy, or I'm dumb. It is rarely any of those things. And that can cause real damage to a person's self-esteem, to how they view themselves. And if it's at all possible for families to get this data early and often, then we can really create a cohesive plan and prevent any of those potential negative feedback loops to the brain. Additionally, it can really empower the student to go, oh, I'm off the charts in visual spatial processing. That's why I'm able to do the following. And of course, when it comes to neurodivergence, complex learning profiles, we certainly want to understand that early and often. And the two that come to mind that would be the most common would be, well, three perhaps, would be spectrum. We would definitely want to know, and we now know that for spectrum, the net is far wider than we even knew, far wider. What may have been in the zeitgeist even 5 years ago has shifted completely. For example, we see a lot of teenage girls that present with social anxiety, but they have friends, they are communicative, they're in traditional schools, and they're being diagnosed with spectrum disorder and need to have a different approach to the way that they approach academics, social, family, and having those diagnoses early super important as well because it doesn't look the same as what our societal expectations are of autism. And the second one I would say we see a lot of is dyslexia. We are doing a much better job now of being able to support the dyslexic learner. We know that there are some extraordinary stats out there that 40% of self-made millionaires have dyslexia. We've previously characterized it in a very negative way. And I would say from the research and from my own anecdotal experience in my practice, it is one of the most powerful learning profiles to have. The dyslexic brain structurally is different than the non-dyslexic brain. And the dyslexic brain is really able to synthesize and see things in a different manner. And because the dyslexic brain struggles with reading and spelling from a phonics perspective, and that's the way that most traditional schools teach, reading is not accessible to the dyslexic learner from a young age without intervention and support. And so what often happens with the dyslexic learner is they develop these other areas of their profile that I deem superpowers. They're able to see and do things that the non-dyslexic learner simply is not. Oftentimes we will see the most extraordinary communicators. We will see their ability to pattern hunt and to find things that others are not able to see in ways that I think are hyper developed, in part because they know that when the second, third grade teacher is saying, going around in a circle and saying, read this out loud, the sheer panic that ensues because they cannot pronounce all of the words and their classmates may make fun of them. They are over-indexing and figuring out ways to appear competent, appear like they are skilled. And by doing those reps, they are often able to become the best debaters, the best communicators, because the written word is not always accessible to them. And I do believe that explains why we have an over-index number of self-made millionaires that have dyslexia. You have a huge number of CEOs that talk about their own experience. Now, the downside of what we see with the dyslexic learner is there's a lot of academic trauma typically because they are being tasked to do things that they are not capable of doing. So spelling tests, that's like asking someone in a wheelchair to dunk a basketball. That is not a fair ask of the dyslexic learner. We now know that the same foreign language, especially with the Romance language, it's not accessible to do those grammar, spelling, and conversion with the dyslexic brain. And in conjunction with some of my families, we now have language exemptions at some of the private schools here in LA, which is a really strong, smart move forward. The Ivies absolutely have language exemptions for the dyslexic learner. So we understand, but we still have a lot of work to do as a society to support the dyslexic learner. Then I would say the third one that we see most common would be the ADHD profile. And we now know the ADHD brain, again, structurally different, and it is a executive functioning challenge, and it is a result of a lack of dopamine. And that inconsistent flow of dopamine that occurs is why we see inconsistent production and experiences with the ADHD learner. A lot of parents will say, well, my kid can spend hours on video games, be locked in and fully committed. Why can't they do that in another area? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, the dopamine hits that the video games provide allow the brain to stay fully engaged. Another thing is that it's a misnomer that ADHD means you can't focus. It means you hyper focus on the things you're excited about, and the brain disregards and dismisses the things that it's not excited about. And so that psychoeducation piece of really having families understand what even is it, and then what do we do about it, I think is vitally important, particularly as we are entering into an era where the research seems to support that these short form tech experiences on social media are making it harder for long-term attention span. And we're going to have to contend as a society with what do we do with that. And so in my own practice, all students need support on executive functioning. That is from a prefrontal cortex perspective. It is still in development. Now we think maybe till age 30. We used to say 25, but research is now saying maybe till age 30. And so that means structurally, our prefrontal cortex is not fully capable of taking on all of the executive functioning demands that we're expecting out of our kids. And that's where you'll see parents say, I don't understand. He forgets his homework every day, or he left his backpack, or, why is he forgetting all of these things? And that is in part because that prefrontal cortex, that ability to think ahead and plan, is not fully developed. And what we want to do is try to create structures that can work to be able to do those tasks, to execute them. And regardless of whether you have an ADHD diagnosis or not, every student benefits from executive functioning support and planning ahead, because that's something that you have to practice, and it's something that the brain has not fully developed to do. And quite frankly, we are asking our kids to do executive functioning tasks that they are not equipped to do. And in our post-tech world versus what life was like before the internet became the norm, the amount of tasks that teachers, schools are asking the kids to do has increased by a long shot. It's become necessary for kids to be checking their email all the time, posting on discussion boards, doing responses to classmates. So the actual amount of tasks that we're asking them to do has increased a lot. And with that increase, it's an increase on the executive functioning and being able to do that. And that, again, is why a lot of the work that I do directly with students is about planning ahead, time management, and being able to break tasks down into smaller pieces, because we have a volume challenge and then we're battling a truly developmental challenge that our brains are not really ready to do all of this.
Just amen. Amen to all of that. And I love it. So something that you repeated was for testing is early and often. So for parents listening to this, can you clarify with early meaning how early? And also, is there a like too late? And then by how often? That's not something I think I have talked about with you before of like, okay, so when does the need for retesting come in and how often in an ideal world should that be done?
Really good question. And again, it's going to depend on the finances of the family, because engaging in these tests are expensive. If a student is in, just as a caveat, if a student's in a public school system, and it will vary by state, but if the teachers or the school recommends testing, that should be paid for through that district. But if we're talking about private testing, I think it's useful for families to have that testing done in kindergarten, first grade, so that we have an idea of how is the reading developing? What do we know about the capacity to take in visual information, phonics? All of that would be very useful, ideally. It also will really help us figure out what academic environment might be best for that student. Do we need something highly structured? Do we need something a little looser? Do we need something that focuses more on creativity, less on testing, weekly spelling tests versus something where you have more of an interactive experience? So that, I would say, you start there. Then the next round of testing is going to be probably around fifth and sixth grade. That will give us then a bigger snapshot of how the reading has developed. And by doing the consistent testing, we should see certain scores remain the same and consistent throughout time. IQ scores should not change. That should stay consistent. If they do change, we want to understand why, and we want to understand what's happening from a brain perspective, biological perspective, so that we can do a little more investigative work. But having that testing done early gives us an idea of where the baseline started. So fifth and sixth grade, that helps because a lot of families are at that point deciding, where are we going to middle school? What kind of middle school is going to be best? I do a lot of school placement in LA, and you hear a lot of families say, this school is the quote, the best. Well, it might be the best if it matches your learning profile. And we want you to be, if we can, try to have an understanding of the way that you learn. How does the school teach? What are the expectations? So we can try to match those in the best way possible. Then the next round is going to be at 16, because at 16, that battery of tests can last you all the way through college. And if you have accommodations in your testing at 16 and older, you will not have to do another battery of tests. So ideally, we're talking about 3 rounds of testing. Based on that testing, you may want to go in for some additional testing to identify more specifically a certain area. And we'll know that once you do that general battery, and then we go, ooh, there's an area here that we really want to know more of, and then go back in for that. But equipping parents with this data is so helpful in making these big decisions, helpful in what kind of support is going to really move the needle. And then for the student, if you have it explained in the right way, the hope and the goal is for them to feel really proud of the way that they learn and go, this is how I learn, and this is so cool, and this is how I can navigate. And I always train my students to be able to go in and talk to their teachers about the way that they learn, so that they can be a team together, so that the teachers are equipped with that knowledge as well. And they can really figure out what are some strategies that are going to make it a successful experience for everyone.
I love that concept of agency that you brought in because I think, yeah, often we rely on the teacher so much, but like this is quite complicated. And, also just want to thank you live on the podcast that after we spoke last time, my son who's in kindergarten is getting tested, and I would have definitely thought that was too early. And now I'm like, oh no, I'm going to get you tested now, fifth and sixth grade, again at 16, because even without the testing, I'm starting to see like some of the ways he's learning in school are not resonating. And then there are other things that are. And so I'm able to just like at home shape our environment and the kinds of activities we're doing around his interests, which like I grew up in LA too and went to what my parents said was the best school, was like hardcore, elite private school, very academic, totally the wrong school for me. And it wasn't even until you said this now, like I did fine enough. I got into NYU, but that learning trauma, like it wasn't until my late
Yes.
20s, almost 30, that I realized like I'm actually smart. I went through all
Yes.
school thinking like I'm so dumb. Everyone is smarter than me. It's easy for everyone to get straight A's. Like, why is this not right? The things I was interested in, like they didn't really have, or like my parents thought were weird. I remember wanting to like go to art school and they were like, we're not paying for you to do like paper mache or whatever. Like, so all these things. And I kept changing my interest to like make them more palatable. And it really took me like so much deep work on my own to realize like I'm actually intelligent. Like I'm not dumb.
You are touching on an unfortunate experience of so many, that it is true academic trauma and it compounds over time, and you internalize it and your brain creates these stories of exactly what you said. I see everyone around me doing XYZ in such a quote easy manner. Why can't I do that? And it creates this doubt and this limiting belief system that you had to claw your way out of, and you did. And that shows the extraordinary resilience and the ability to do that, and how incredible reflection of who you are, and that you'll take that with you so you're able to turn that trauma into something really powerful. But knowing what we know now, we would prefer for you not to have gone through that, to build the grit, the stamina, resilience through something else. And you are going to break that generational pattern with your son, and he is going to be able to be in an environment that's as closely aligned to the way that he processes, so that he can experience the best of himself from a very young age. And that's what we want for all of our kids now that we know. And it's not that your parents did the best they possibly could and with all the information they had available to them. They didn't know what they didn't know. And now that we know more about the impact of different learning environments, complex learning profiles, we know that there are so many different paths to finding meaning, success, and it does not have to happen in a prescribed manner. We have a lot of different ways to do so. I have so many examples from my own practice where that's the case. And it seemed like the environment was going to be such a limiting factor. And by making strategic decisions and moving to a different environment, we got a completely different outcome. And it takes bravery for parents to make these decisions. It takes a lot of guts. And the hope is that as we have more and more examples of families doing it, that people will do the deep dive, will do the detective work, and make choices that are going to be in alignment with their kids, because we can get to oftentimes the same quote end goal, whether that's an NYU, a Harvard, wherever that is, by going about it in a different manner. And a lot of times parents are so scared, understandably so, to not do right by their kids. They want to do everything right to create the conditions for their kids to have a happy, successful life. And I would say the most important step is to understand, how do they process and see the world? Because that is something rooted in who they are. That's part of their genetic makeup, their DNA, how they process. And if we understand that, we can then make some really strategic decisions that will get us the outcome we want. And it's typically not the right strategy to try to force an environment, force a process if it's just not in alignment. And I'm really excited for you to have the data for your son so that we can put our heads together and brainstorm. What does that then mean? What does that mean for inside of school? What does that mean for outside of school? And then how do we really build up that story for him so that he knows how to walk into any environment and go, ooh, this is the way that I really learn best. And this is how I can showcase my strengths. And I'm excited to, see how all of this unfolds and happy to help in any way I can.
Literally, so excited and kind of, in a way, I think everything kind of happens for a reason. Like my son was at a school that I thought was like the dream school. It's a Waldorf school. It's nature-based. They don't like learn
Yep.
how to read until first grade. And he was so unhappy and started like having all of these issues, didn't want to go to school. And after 3 months, I just pulled him out and put him in like a traditional public school. Granted, we live in an area like that has kind of world-class public schools, which is unusual.
Yes.
All of the parents are
Yes.
professors at like Harvard and
Mhm.
MIT, all class sizes. And I thought, like, this is my worst nightmare. My parents did to me. I'm not going to do that. So I put him in a school that I would have loved, and it was totally wrong for him. And like, it's a very humbling experience. I'm trying to do right by my kid, sending him to this incredible environment, and like, he is really unhappy. And what I think happens probably for both of us with students, and I saw it playing out with my son, is that the school really made it out to be that like my kid was the problem. And I started to kind of believe that. And I thought, like, well, he's been in school for 6 years, never had any issues. Like, why is all this behavior emerging? And they really made it out to be him. And once I took him out and put him in a new environment, like he just completely changed and like went back into himself. And I think as parents, in our line of work, like we have to stay humble and be willing to like constantly be proven wrong, change our minds, even when you think you're doing right by your kid. That may not be the case. Like the world may be telling you you made a mistake. And so, how do you kind of quickly pivot and change and work with systems like schools that, at least in my experience with working with a lot of schools all over the world, like the schools seem to me to be more likely to like have the kid be the problem than want to adapt their methodology or teaching.
Oh my gosh, I think hitting on an experience that so many families can relate to, and it feels devastating to have that feedback that there's something, quote, wrong with your kid. That is truly like never the case. It is trying to figure out how can I find the closest environment for the way that my kid sees and experiences the world. And we got to keep hunting until we find that and support them. The behavior stuff you're describing, that's data for us. It tells us that there is a misalignment and we need to take it seriously. And then we need to figure out how can I be a detective and figure out what environment elicits a different behavior, a different reaction. And that data will then help inform us how to then make a different decision. And I would say parents are so hard on themselves and are always doing the very best they can. And I would say to you, you make the best decisions with the data you have at the time. And then once you have more data, once you have more info, allow yourself to go, ooh, I do need to pivot. I do need to make a change. But it's not that you made a mistake. You made the choice based on what you thought the data was leading to. What a mistake would be is if we keep staying in those environments or keep doing the same things that we know are not eliciting the outcome we want. So we're limited in a lot of times of what schools we pick. And once we have that information feedback loop of, ooh, we need to make a shift or we need to have some targeted support at home to help make this experience a more manageable / positive experience, let's try it. And we try different approaches and pivot as necessary. But they're not mistakes. You're doing the best you can with the data you have, and we learn. Our kids are teachers for ourselves, and they allow us to realize that we have to be flexible. We have to be able and willing to try different things. And so you're making all the right decisions and choices that are going to have a higher likelihood of having him be happy and successful in these environments.
The goal. Yes. So for our listeners who are like listening in and might have kids who are later teens, late high school, early college, and thinking, wow, I never knew any of this. This is all like mind blowing. What are next steps? What do I do right now if I want to like dive in from a neuropsych perspective? And also maybe if they're students, I think what's so beautiful about your work is like just the reframe from problem to opportunity. It's like maybe you have a student who's thriving in school, who's a straight A student, but the world is changing, careers are changing. Like we're in a period of rapid technological advance, and they want an understanding of their child's learning profile and brain as they're crossing that threshold from high school to college, not necessarily because they're struggling in school, but school is like such an artificial environment that doesn't really
Oh,
help
yeah.
what you're good at. So for kind of those families who are listening in, like what's your recommendation on next practical steps that they can take right now?
I love this question because it's the whole foundation of why I think testing is so important. It is, I think if I could wave a magic wand, everyone would have testing done so that they understand with more specificity of the complexity of their profile, where their strengths are, where the areas of challenge are. And if a family is open to doing that, what we would do is we get the comprehensive testing, and then we're able to apply real world applications to those strengths. And then we would collaborate with someone like you, where we say we have a team meeting and say, this is the learning profile strengths. This is where they're able to see the world in such a clear manner. So, for example, let's give that visual spatial strength that could very well apply to different areas of the STEM world, and doing internships in labs and doing hands-on work, going into robotics, things like that. You are masterful at understanding the full scope of where those real world applications are and where the opportunities are. And that's why I love having my students work with you, because you're able to curate these very specific and exciting internships, career path, mentorship, all of these arenas that can be super targeted to those learning profile strengths. We ideally want the alignment of where someone's passionate and where they're really strong in capacity. And that would be a dream for families to start engaging with in those high school years, even if they don't have a profile that has been identified as neurodivergent, or needing to, is not neurotypical, needing to have a little deep dive there. Everyone benefits. Adults benefit from it. It's really never too late to engage in testing. There are neuropsychologists that specialize in adolescents, neuropsychologists specialize in adolescents and adults. It is useful information for everyone to have about their brain. And it also can explain a lot of what their lived experience was like, why something came so easily to them versus something that didn't. And we can really help guide them into strategic experiences, coursework, internships that can be in alignment with the way that they learn. And that's why I think it's a multi-pronged approach. The work that you do allows students to see the fruits of their labor. Why have I taken all of this coursework? What can it lead to? And the paving that you do with them of this is the application of it. And then being strategic in their collegiate coursework of this path can then lead to this career field. And it all ties together, because if there's a way for us to identify an Uber strength early on, then you get to be even more strategic in what we're going to recommend for them. And there's nothing better for you and me in our practices then to see kids light up and do things they never thought were possible or exposed to career paths that feel so magical and exciting. Like we live for that. And I'm in the trenches with my students in these courses, and I do it because it is a metaphor. I want my students to know that we can find the path to mastering these complex subjects so that when they are working with you, when they are in the real world in these career opportunities, they know how to execute and they know how to tap into their strengths. And I live for these success stories and upward trajectories. It's so beautiful to bear witness to humans living in their purpose and excited about what they're doing. We really get to experience this beautiful arc of humanity, and I take it so seriously and feel really honored that I get to be part of these really crucial years of development. And if I can be helpful to you directly or any of your listeners that won't have questions, I'm happy always to point people in the right direction of what might be next steps to do.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And we will have probably a curated email for listeners who reach out who want more support. And I won't put this in the show notes. I want to call you Dr. Sam. I don't know if you go. So we won't put your email out there on the internet, but we'll have sort of curated resources and recommendations for those of you who would like to get started and dig in with testing, etc. And we can send that out if you reach out to us. So thank you so much. What a delight it has been to talk to you. And I know everyone will gain so much from this.
Always incredible to connect with you, and wishing the best to you and to all the listeners out there. And till next time.